Ladies and gentlemen, let us step inside Neltharion's lair. What do you expect to see when we say that? I think that's a big and important question. When I tell you that the Maw of Souls is a galleon in the sea, when I say we're going into Neltharion's lair, what do you think awaits inside? I think that is always going to be a bummer with this dungeon, is you expect certain things. What I will say is there are very cool visual little things. It's a very short dungeon that you only get to experience once, so I'm not going to include them in the video. So hopefully, unless you really want to get spoiled by it, you'll wait and see what that actually holds for you. Similarly, the Halls of Valor, I left something out of there, so hopefully when you get there, you'll be like, oh, cool. And I'm glad Capriccia didn't spoil that for us. We're into Neltharion's lair. What do we expect to see? What you might be surprised to see is it actually kicks off with a Moradon vibe. Been a long time since we've been there. You're going to go down some waterfalls, friends, deep into the caverns below, and to see what awaits you in there. What, of course, awaits you deep into the earth? That is, of course, rock monsters. Rock elementals and rock monsters live down there, and worms and evil, nasty things that live beneath the soil, which makes a lot of sense. It does. The actual Neltharion's lair is actually really logical in the design that they've gone for, and I appreciate that. I was like, why would this be here? I was like, well, of course this is down here. We're down in dirty caves, and we're deep below the surface. This makes a lot of sense why this is here. So getting that Moradon feel was actually really cool for me. I really, really enjoyed it. I was like, oh, God, I haven't done something like this in so long. Well played, Blizz, for putting that back in. Even if it's just a useless intro, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all, because it gives you the feeling of going deep into the earth, which is very different because it happens very quickly, rather than like the Black Rook hold, I should say. One of my criticisms was, in order to get that feeling that you were ascending a really tall tower, they had to sort of pad it out with a lot of stairs and a lot of trash, which was like a bit of a drag. In order to get this feeling, they could obviously just throw you down there by using water as the sort of breakwater on the way down. So that's how it kicks off, with that Moradon feeling once again. So once we're actually inside, what do we encounter? We encounter the rocks and we encounter the worms, which is next to say the trash is not that interesting. Not that interesting at all. It's exactly what you'd expect to see in there. It's not difficult. It doesn't do anything interesting particularly. Worms go underground and pop up somewhere else. Yeah. Isn't that fun? Not really. Bit of a drag. And I haven't got much to say on it, other than it could do with doing something interesting. There's lots of little trash, and it's just an AoE fest for the most part. I would much rather less trash that was more interesting. That would be so much better. Just give them something to do other than just being big bags of health that we have to work through that don't do anything. Maybe the challenge modes, they'll add some mechanics to it, but I highly doubt it. I think they'll just up the damage, if I'm being honest. That tends to be what they do with trash and challenge modes, really. So, yeah, let's go straight to the first boss. The first boss is really curious, because he's really easy, and he reminds me of the first boss, or the second boss, I should say, in the Mana Tombs. TBC dungeon is where I see a lot of inspiration for this boss. Very large rock creature, and has lots of mechanics that involve spraying you with shards of rock and spawning little rocky monsters to come and get you. Now, when I say very easy, as always in these videos, I want you to understand the context of the normal mode is to just show you what the mechanics are like, and then they're going to turn them up later in the expansion. Yeah, they're going to turn them up and come up with some new and ingenious ways of doing this. And one thing I noticed is the platform where you fight the big rock monster is actually really large, but you absolutely don't need any of that space, which gave it a very similar feeling to the first boss in Dark Heart Thicket, which also fills the space in some way. His is like void zones, and in this case, in Neltharion's lair, it's actually just poison clouds. And he obviously doesn't generate anywhere near enough for it to become a problem, which means there's a huge amount of empty space while you're fighting this guy, and you always feel like something should be happening here, but it never does. But that's what's going to change later in the mode. But unfortunately, the normal, what you get is a boss that just dies. You just DPS it down, there's AoE damage on the party, and it falls over dead. So don't be too excited when you get into normal, because you'll be like, oh, okay. Boss is something, for the most part, I'll give you an example, just to be a little bit more clear, so it's a little bit less critical and dull, is that several times when I went in there with people who were there the first time, they were like, what do we do here, what do we do here? And it was the first real time that my response was, it's fine, just pull, you'll be okay, and it always was. It was like, oh, okay, and it worked. Nothing much to think about there at all. But it's to be expected in normal mode. I suppose this is one of those bosses that has the potential, and I think this is important. It has the potential to become quite dark and quite evil and quite mean as the difficulty of it goes up. Even if you just started spawning the poison clouds more regularly, and it wasn't just a case. What I hope is they don't do this, and that is just up the damage of his AoE, which affects the party to the point where you like got to blow a cooldown. That's kind of really boring if they just turn the damage up, but actually start increasing the rate at which he does mechanics, which means the healing in between the AoE is much more intense, and there's a lot more movement, and we're using this big open space. I will say that you're right next to water. A really big sort of river, or a big pond would be more accurate, I suppose, where you land because you're falling down to the earth, as I just told you. I would really like that to have been used somewhere, like being in the water made you safe, or being in the water did something, or perhaps he does something to the ground because he is a rock elemental, and he turned the actual solid ground area to that, and you had to dive in the water, or maybe you had to go, stuff falls from the ceiling if you're shaking the cavern, and you had to use the water in some way, because there's a really big watery area right next to where you fight the boss, which felt underutilized, and I might have looked at that as being involved somehow, and it kind of took me back to one of the end time heroics where you were fighting on the lava river and the various platforms were being degraded and you had to shift across and jump through the lava to actually move around and control the boss. I would like something, maybe something like that would be cool, but that's a lot of extra mechanics, which I don't think they'll do. At the minimum, they're going to turn up the damage of his mechanics, but I hope he starts doing them much faster and really causes the space to become a problem, and positioning and stuff needs to be a factor. I love that kind of stuff where you start off easy, but, you know, if you have people stood in the wrong place, that can lead to a big disaster big quickly, and you have to work as a team to counter that. So let's continue down through Neltharion's Lair, where we'll start encountering I forget the names of these, you lore guys will know what they are. They're rock beasts. They're not trogs. They're like rock muscly beasts, which is more trash. And they have a mechanic there which I think will be a big fucking nightmare in terms of activating alarms. We are returning of the activating alarms. In this case, it is the drums. They will start banging on the drums, and that's supposed to cause all kind of problems. Now, obviously, I've never met a group that has allowed this guy to actually bang on the drums to see what happens. It's never happened. The mob that does it dies too quickly, and it can be stunned and CC'd and all that kind of stuff. Really hope that's not the case in the challenge mode. Like, surely even if it was just immune to storm, it brings me back to Sinestra, where there were Dragonkin during the Sinestra fight that had to be interrupted, but you weren't allowed to use interrupts. It was a nice little twist on it, so you had to use things like Gouge, Death Grip, all these kind of things to actually stop him casting, rather than just a stun or an interrupt, because that would cause him to set the spell off. You had to find different ways of interrupting, and I really hope that he's immune to some stuff, so you can't just, like, interrupt him, or maybe fear him and you take that risk, or something along those lines. That would be cool, just so that there's a proper strategy to be dealt with, rather than a rogue, like, stealthing over and cheap shotting or whatever, just to get this guy down, or just gripping him back or whatever. It'd be cool to see something like that. So the drums were a real factor, very much like the Violet Hold, where the door's not really a factor in normal mode. That in the challenge mode, that certainly is a factor. So moving through the trash then, not too difficult, because the drums don't get set off, and if you don't set the drums off, the trash is nicely spread out in a very, very convenient way. The only mechanic of interest here is the Basilisk Stun, which can be interrupted, and I'm being serious, that's about the limit of the interest of this trash. The rest of it is just melee damage, and nothing much else to think about whatsoever leading up to the next boss. Now, the next boss is cool. I actually didn't know this mechanic, and shame on me, but I'll gladly give him credit. It was Noble who actually told me what was going on here. So I kind of had to explain this boss to understand what my thinking of it was, which is completely wrong. But I will say, I wish this was the way it worked. So we fight a big rock boss who then goes beneath the surface, and 3 totems are in the area. And what you have to do is play the what's it called? You know the game you see on the streets where you'll have the 3 cups? The 3 cups, and there's a ball under a cup, and he shifts all the cups around, and you have to pick which one's the ball's under, right? I think it's called Cups or something. It's a game of that, so you have to see which totem the boss goes under, and then those totems will start shifting around very, very quickly. In challenge mode, I imagine they go super fucking fast. I would give you that sort of Shovel Man's vibe, where you had to pick when the woman split into one of the Voss family, split into all the different versions of her, and you had to find the one that matched her exactly, you know, that kind of vibe. Well, it's that sort of thing, so you got to follow this totem around and then pick which one he's under, and then kill that totem. If you kill, there's 3 totems, so killing any of the other totems that he's not under is just a total waste of time, while he's continuing to shatter the cavern on you and create lots of AoE damage. So I assume that in the challenge mode, one, you'll have to be Johnny on the fucking spot with figuring out which one he is, and then burst the shit out of it, because I imagine that cavern is going to wreck your party. If you don't kill that thing super fast, you're fucked. That is definitely how that mechanic's going to work. You can already see it a mile away. What I actually hoped for, which I thought would be very cool, was actually going for a bit of a Legend of Zelda vibe instead. Whereas the totems would appear and then you had to push them as a concerted group. Now, you might say that's a little bit difficult to coordinate. I've got to tell you, in the dungeon I'm covering after this one, which is the Vault of the Wands, they have a mechanic exactly like that. So it's not beyond the realms of reasonable thinking to think that Blizzard would implement something where you have to push totems into a certain pattern or fill slots or something like that, which coordinates each of the group in order to get him to come back out. Or sort of like you're caging him in or something like that and can't let him move or something like that. Something along those lines would have been really fun, in my opinion, rather than the follow the thing. But all it takes is one, because at the moment all it takes is one guy. It takes one guy to spot it and then mark it and then DPS it. So when I was on my priest, once I figured out the mechanic, or should I say once Noble told me what the mechanic was compared to what I thought it was, all I did was follow it, and then I would instantly, like, holy fire if I was on Holy Priest. If I was on my Moonkin, I would start moonfiring that one, and then people would kind of spot that and just chase after the one I was attacking. And it was sort of an unwritten rule. They were just waiting to see if anybody could figure it out which one it was. What I will say, though, not a lot of groups can work this out. Even if after I explained what was going on, they didn't get it. So how this will work when they don't have players like myself who can, who are doing the mechanics and showing them which one to attack. I will be interested to see how some other groups get on with that. But obviously, I'm always going to be in the groups that I'm in. So I suppose I have to wait for anecdotal evidence on that one. As we continue down, we go to our third boss of 4. Giant Nasty Worm, which again is going to be a fucking nightmare in challenge mode. I know it is. This is going to be one of the more difficult dungeons, I think. I suspect I would put this right up there. Involves a very, very enclosed space where the actual boss is, but lots of room behind it, and they take advantage of that by making it into an arena. They're called Drogbar. They're called Drogbar, aren't they? I remember the message now that Drogbar jumps down from the stands. So it's very much an arena where you're sort of Star Wars-esque being pitted against this big beast, which is a big worm, and they will jump down and start chasing you around. And the idea is that you kite them. You can kite them while they get killed, or you CC them. So obviously when I was on my druid, I was just rootsing them and typhooning them and stuff, and they were completely ignored while we just killed the boss. And that's how you're going to deal with this in normal mode. Now, in challenge mode, I've no doubt you can't do that. There'll be something that, these things either gain speed, and in fact, this ties into the last boss as well, gathering speed, or can't be CC'd forever. I kept one in roots throughout the entire fight without any issue at all. It was never broken. It never got diminishing returns or anything like that. I assume they can be sheeped. I've not tried on my mage, to be honest with you. Or they can be killed. So we had in one of my groups, a hunter was just killing them all the time while the melee just face rolled the boss, essentially. But that's the normal mode version. That's expected to happen. I really expect this to turn into a clusterfuck in challenge mode and require some serious coordination, or in fact, just maybe promote heavy CC groups. We'll have to see how that works out. So as we then move into the actual Neltharion's lair, as we go deeper and deeper underground, I really love how they've managed to create this verticality in here in comparison to Blackrock Hold. I think it's really nice. You move out to a much darker, more cavernous, more lava-filled dungeon, where we'll have very few trash that hits really hard. And you have to be very careful. You can do everything in one pull, and that's how it's done right now. When I've been healing, the groups have certainly chain pulled constantly, and in the last one they pulled all the trash before the last boss, which involved like some serious healing cooldowns to survive for sure, but was perfectly doable as we did it and nobody died. But it's very painful, and as soon as that starts gaining more damage than normal, yeah, that's gonna fucking suck. I guarantee that you're not gonna be able to do that. And then it moves us to our last boss, which was the only disappointing boss I actually fought. Like I said, the other bosses are easy, but they have great potential to be awesome. This is the only boss that I was actually a little disappointed in, because the notification you get during the fight is that the waves are incoming. What does that make you think of? That instantly gives you the Neltharion feeling, right? That there are huge lava waves coming, and you do fight in a lava pit. And I was like, oh fuck. Now, why was I oh fuck? The other mechanics of the fight involve the tank being knocked around silly. You abuse a wall right now, which is something that I teach both tanks to do, but I'm hoping in the challenge mode you can't do that. So when he does knock the tank back, I expect him to gain some sort of buff, Ragnaros style, where if he does reach you in a certain amount of time, he's going to fuck you up big time. I would expect that to be something like that, so you can't just tank against the wall and get knocked back and knocked straight, and not really move anywhere. And the reason for that is the heavy movement could promote something like this. So when I saw the Neltharion waves, another mechanic of the boss is to spawn a giant molten elemental who will start fixating on someone and chasing them. So the tank's trying to move around and keep the boss next to the elemental so it can be killed, it can be stunned, it can be do all these kind of things. And I expect in challenge mode that to be a CC. Now, if you say that there's some Neltharion waves, not only have you got the tank being knocked back and having to be careful about his position and where he gets knocked back, But then you also have the guy kiting a big elemental while also trying to reach a specific gap. To avoid the lava wave, right? And that creates a really interesting, fun, chaotic encounter. That would be really nice. Unfortunately, the lava doesn't work that way. Oh, a bit of a bummerino, to be honest with you, because all this movement on this large platform could have led to something really cool and some good coordination amongst experienced groups, which I think is really nice. Well, instead, what we have is he will spawn a wall. Yeah, Saffron all over again, guys, with the ice tombs. He will spawn a wall, and then he'll be like, the waves are coming. You stand behind the wall, and he doesn't move and follow. So it's the usual shit we've seen before. And I was like, oh, man. You had such an opportunity here to do something very cool, and I'm kind of sad you didn't take advantage of it. But okay, we'll let it slide this time. Overall, very cool dungeon. Very, very cool dungeon. I wish the trash was changed made it a lot more interesting, because I've not had any interest doing the trash, and as you probably see when I show you the healer perspective, I was just DPSing most of it because there's nothing much to worry about here at all. This is normal mode, of course, but just upping the damage isn't enough to make this interesting, so it's just gonna make me less DPSy and more healy, which is, you know, it is what it is. It's not that fun. They could definitely do with tweaking the trash here so it does something interesting. Make less of it, sure, that's fine, no problem with that. It doesn't need to be the same amount, but make them do something cool. You have these huge open cavernous spaces with a Wailing Caverns look to them. Do something cool there. Do something cool there. Make something happen. I would really love to see that. But overall, it's a really good dungeon and some nice original mechanics, which I think is a good thing, right? You're not going to complain about that. And I certainly look forward to the challenge mode. All right, guys. Bye-bye.